This episode is presented by Lost Bell Wines. Rebranding from one of the oldest wineries in Nova Scotia, Lost Bell is bringing a new twist to classic wines.
The Lost Bell Rosé is sure to be your new go-to refresher with a gorgeous pink color and deliciously simple taste and finish. If rosé isn't your thing, their Saval or Baco Noir will be sure to thrill your taste buds.
All of their wines are handcrafted in Falmouth, Nova Scotia by their wonderful winemaker, Tony. Kick back and sip the flavors of the valley with Lost Bell Wines by Saint Fimi.
Welcome to the morning meeting with Sarah and Jess,
where the tea is hot, the wine is chilled, and no topic is off limits. Pull up a chair and join us. There is room for all of you here.
We won't limit seating, we'll just build a bigger table. Let's begin today's meeting.
When it came time for Danielle and her husband, Mark, to start their journey to parenthood, they quickly realized that this journey was not going to be as smooth as they had hoped. Danielle and Mark's fertility journey took them from Nova Scotia to Prague, Czech Republic, 3 times on an emotional path to parenthood. Danielle will share her experience with 3 rounds of fertility treatments, devastating pregnancy losses, dealing with anxiety throughout it all, and why it has all been worth it with the birth of their beautiful twin daughters. Danielle is the co-founder and managing partner of Anchored Ideas marketing and communications agency, Anchored Recruiting, and of Devontech IT and Security. Outside of business, Danielle and her husband, Mark, are so proud to live here on Cape Breton Island with their beautiful and busy 2-year-old twin girls, Audrey and Sophie. In recent years, Danielle has fiercely jumped into the infertility community and has become passionate about helping families one-on-one, quietly, throughout their journey. In this episode, we'll talk to Danielle about navigating infertility from Cape Breton Island, some of the resources that are out there to help, and how her and her husband started to include friends and family into their fertility conversations and journey. We'll also talk to her about advice for couples going through infertility and ways to take care of both yourself and your relationship during this process.
Carolyn Cote-Dubé, originally from Cape Breton, joined Fertility Matters Canada as the executive director in February 2015. A vocal advocate for funding of publicly funded fertility treatments, she now has 3 children conceived through assisted reproductive technology. Carolyn believes in equal access and support for all of those who need to build their families. Carolyn is a founding leader of East Coast Miracles. She holds a BSc in Human Kinetics from St. Francis Xavier University and MSc in Exercise and Sports Science from the University of New Brunswick. Carolyn is a true believer in the importance of education, support, and continued advocacy for the highly effective medical treatment of assisted reproductive technology, ART. She looks forward to continuing to support the 1 in 6 Canadians who are struggling to build their families.
Hi, Danielle. Hi, Carolyn.
Hello.
Hi, everybody.
Welcome to the morning meeting. We're so happy to have you around our table this evening. How are you both doing?
Wonderful.
Great.
Thank you so much for this opportunity.
When I saw you both come on, it came up on my screen, Anchored Ideas and Fertility Matters Canada. And I was like, what a group of gals right now. Yeah. Like, holy moly. Amazing.
How lucky are we?
We're lucky. So lucky. So lucky.
We are so honored to have you around the table and sharing this story and information with our listeners. We know just from chats that we've had with people who have been following the podcast, this is a topic that's really important and near and dear to a lot of people's hearts. And we're just so honored that you both are with us this evening to tell us more and share your stories and educate us a little bit more in this very, very important topic. So why don't you tell all of us a little bit more about yourselves and how you know one another and your connection? That would be lovely.
So I am originally from North Sydney, so I'm from Cape Breton, and I am now in New Brunswick. So I've lived in many cities across this country, from Montreal, Halifax several times, Calgary, Belleville, Ontario, and now we're settled back in Atlantic Canada. I'm here with my husband and our 3 kids who are all here because we had to do fertility treatment. We did IVF, and my eldest is 8, and I have twins who are 3, all boys. So
wow.
Yeah, it's pretty active and crazy over here. And I'm also the executive director at Fertility Matters Canada. So we are a national Canadian charity. We provide support support, education, awareness, and we do advocacy work for more equitable access to fertility care for those who need it in Canada. So I know Danielle through several like avenues in my life. We have like familial connections. My cousin and Danielle went to university together. But I knew of Danielle when I was younger. And then our paths crossed professionally, sort of through social media. And then again, I would say through Danielle's own fertility journey.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. And now, as being twin parents, we are in a twin conversation together 24/7.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, it's been awesome. And you've become such a close friend of mine, and someone who I can definitely confide in on a personal level. Yeah.
Danielle, did you know Carolyn was in this role? Was she in this role when you reached out to her to help you along on your journey?
Yeah, so Carolyn is quite active in the private groups. So there's quite a few fertility private groups through social media, and Carolyn is like that go-to person. So a lot of times when somebody asks a question, they'll take Carolyn and Carolyn will answer. And so I was always seeing her name come up and her saying, you know, this is what you do. This is who you talk to. And then Carolyn's really has been open about her journey throughout this entire process of her IVF journey. And we were connected through social media. So when she was going through it, I was going through treatments at the same time during some of those paths. And so she was really open about medication, process, heartache, everything. And so we would just always be in connect because there wasn't that many people who were that open and that vulnerable. And I was looking for that and seeking that. And that's really like, I feel like how we became really close through that connection.
That's so important. I feel like that must just make you feel like it normalizes the whole process a little bit and must make you feel less alone, right? Like someone else does know or feel what you're going through.
Absolutely.
100%. Mm-hmm. I am one of 100s who slide into Carolyn's DMs on a regular basis, but thankfully, like she hung on to me for a long time, and now we've gotten past the DM stage.
We go straight to iMessage,
yeah. So I know that her network and what the amount of people that she has helped is just beyond, like you couldn't measure it. We wouldn't be able to measure it. So, like it's gone past layers now, and it's so important here, especially in Atlantic Canada.
For
so
sure.
important.
And if I was to think of any friends or family members who have gone through fertility treatments, in particular IVF, one of the biggest things that they have said about the whole process is that it can be incredibly isolating. Incredibly. So even for someone like myself who hasn't been through that, I don't know what questions to ask. What should I be asking? When should I be checking in? What am I checking in on? Right. And I think, we as friends and supporters, we have a role there. And we can talk about that a little bit later of like how we can help and how, we can support. But yeah, I can totally see that. And I've actually apologized to friends and family to say like, wow, like I had no idea. Right. I just had no idea what you were going through. So it's really nice to hear that you had one another and that there are so many other supporters out there and advocacy groups. So I'm excited to get into that.
I'm excited to get into that. I feel like now that we're on the other side, it's so important. Yeah. It's everything. Yeah.
Carolyn, what made you so open and vulnerable with your story and your roller coaster through this journey? What made you want to be so open about that?
So it's funny looking back. So I started my fertility journey 9 years ago, and I, like so many, felt very isolated when we found out that this was going to be an issue, that IVF was our only option. So we have male factor fertility. So the issues with my husband and his sperm, I felt I didn't know how to talk to people about it. And for someone who's very outgoing and has a very strong network of friends, and I'm really close to all of my family, I just shut down and didn't talk to anybody. And we had someone in our lives that said to me, to us as a couple, you need to find a support network outside of your relationship, like your partnership, because you can only support each other through this so much, and it's true. And when I think about those first couple of months, my husband sat me down several times and said, I think we should probably get a divorce. We had only been married we hadn't even been married a year. And he said, you signed up for this knowing that we were going to have kids, and we can't. And it just seemed impossible. And so I started advocating for provincial funding is how I sort of got into it. We were living in Nova Scotia when my son was born. We did our treatment in Halifax because it's super expensive. And, when you're in your early 30s and you find out you have this issue, like you have, your jobs, lots of people just finished an education, mortgage, car payments, all that stuff. You don't have $20,000 sitting in a bank account to hand over to a clinic in the hopes of maybe taking home a baby.
Right.
On top of the the emotional stress, the time off work, all of that stuff. So I started to advocate to say, like, this is ridiculous. We need support. We need money. This is a medical condition. So I started to get my voice a little there, did a few interviews. And then we moved to Montreal and this job became available. And I had a previous manager in another life who was working in the pharmaceutical industry who had said, this is a job that you should really consider. And so I applied and was successful. So as part of that process, I just needed to become comfortable. And the more I talked about it, especially in social media, mostly, probably through messaging and those types of things, I became really connected with the stories of people who are coming through and was shocked at the number of people who would open up and say, I struggled. People in my life who had kids that I would never have known had gone through this, and made the decision that I have a voice. My husband was okay, sharing his side of the story. And I just said that I can't go through my life knowing that other people don't have or may not be as fortunate as we are. And so that's how it became. And then it just became a thing. And then all of a sudden every few days I've got something on my social media about
Wow.
how to have a baby if you can't have a baby.
Yeah.
Right.
And how important. And, we talk about social media in so many different ways, and we've done so on this podcast in different episodes. But when you see the amazing connections that can be made through it and how important it can be and how effective of a tool it can be to connect people across the country experiencing very unique but similar experiences, right? How important and how amazing of you to, I feel like timing was kind of everything, like you stepping into that role in your personal and professional life. That timing meeting up and then realizing how many people out there like you needed someone like you, just like you needed someone else to connect with, right? Danielle, you mentioned a little bit ago about now being on this side of it and looking back and being able to talk about it. Similarly to Carolyn, like when you were going through this journey with your husband, what was your comfort level to reach out with your friends and family? How were you comfortable talking about it? Was it something you were trying to deal with on your own?
Yeah, so I felt like for a little while in the beginning, in the very beginning, Mark and I just kept it to ourselves. We had to go through the emotions like ourselves. It was something that, it just was very unexpected for us, even though looking back, we probably should have been more aware. My husband is a cancer survivor and had gone through cancer treatments, really extensive chemotherapy, and it was years ago. And so by the time we started to have children, we just didn't even think, like, it wasn't a thing that ever came up during treatments. He was too young at the time to do anything about it. And so we had just started to have a family. And then eventually, a year passed and we're like, okay, something might be up here. Like there was no red flags. And so that's when we really started like talking to our doctor here locally in Cape Breton, and then realized quickly we were going to have to go see a specialist in Halifax, a urologist. And then eventually, after lots of testing on both ends, like realized, like, it was male factor infertility for us as well. But also then we just said, okay, we kind of went into like fight mode of saying, well, had really deep conversations together, really lots of communication on if we wanted to start a family, how the extent and length that we would go to it, to do it, what our boundaries were, and just like where we would get started. And during that time, we hadn't told anyone. Like our family hadn't known we were going to Halifax for appointments. Wow. I was embarrassed and ashamed at the time. And we had just started our companies. So we, at that time, had just owned one company, Devantec. And so we were in like fundraising mode, trying to raise money for the company. We were pitching it. We were building it. And like, we literally felt like we're business partners. And so we were living two complete different lives. And so the conversations we were having between Monday to Friday from 9 to 5 were completely different, between 7 to 9 in the morning and 5 to midnight. And so it was an extremely hard time, I would say, for us. And then it wasn't until we started opening up to our really close circle of family and friends when I started feeling relief, and started feeling like, okay, I can breathe a little. And so from that would be when having those conversations, we felt more comfortable sharing like our fertility process and like what that looked like, which I'll get into. But yeah, I think in the beginning, a lot of people have conversations in their bedroom late at night that never see the light of day. Wow. And I think it's really, really, really dark times for relationships, and communication and relationship building and strength is like critical. Yeah. Or like Carolyn said, you have the divorce talks because you're just at the core of who you are.
And I can't imagine how difficult it must be, especially to face that in both of your situations where, Carolyn, you said your husband sits you down and says, okay, you got into this thinking you were going to have kids or wanting kids. That was clear. So now, like, out of love for you, now we end it because we can't do that. Right. And the roller coaster of emotions you must feel in that moment of like, okay, what now? And wanting to protect them and also wanting to processing it on your own. And, those feelings, they must just be so overwhelming.
Definitely. And I found one of the biggest challenges was that we weren't experiencing the same emotions at the same times, like anger and rage. Right. And for one of us, and then the other was curled up in a ball on the bathroom floor. And it happened for both people. And like, the research shows that being diagnosed with infertility has the same impact on someone's mental health as being diagnosed with a more severe medical condition like cancer. Wow. And we don't treat it the same. Like the impact is the same. And, for women, like it's a month, or the people with ovaries, like every month, if you're not conceiving, there's a grieving process. Right. Every single every 28 days, Right. And it really impacts relationships. People who struggle with infertility have a much higher divorce rate. Like I can see why. And I know people who have gone through fertility treatment, haven't been successful, divorced. People who have gone through fertility treatment, conceived, have a child, divorced, because the relation it doesn't leave you. Like it's sort of, it affects you to your core, both partners. And so it's very interesting. And that's why it's so important to have that support network outside of your partner, no matter who your partner is. And, you can find online support groups. Fertility Matters, that's part of what we do. We have online support groups for all provinces, for all kinds of different types of family building. If you're a same-sex couple and are looking to build your family, the supports and the information that you need might be different than someone who's in a heterosexual relationship. If you're a single person, want to have a baby, the supports and information you need are also different. So we try to support different people in different ways.
Right. You both talked about you say very similar experiences to when you realized all of this and when you were having these conversations with specialists, that when you found out and you were diagnosed, that you both shut down. You didn't talk to anyone about it. Like you were saying, Danielle, it was very dark. You were saying, Carolyn, that you just literally that was it. There was no conversation with anyone else. Do you think that is because you kind of didn't have a lot of information about it? It was also new, as opposed to maybe now in, 2022 with a little bit more information. Do you feel like that would have been a little bit different how you reacted to it? Or is this just a grieving process that families go through, similar to another serious diagnosis? I'm just thinking for people listening, the goal for this conversation, right? Is, we want people to open up and have the conversations and seek, not go into that.
That's the thing.
Dark place.
Yeah, I think like for me, my whole life have always been like a high achiever.
Okay.
High on jobs, high on goals, like high on everything. I've always reached everything. And so when we hit that point, I was, I don't know, like 28 at the time, maybe. And I was like, holy shit, like I have to deal with this now. And like, this is an unknown road. I'm in Cape Breton. Like, we don't even have a fertility clinic here. There's, we don't have resources that are readily available for me right here. I don't have a doctor that I could reach out to. My doctor at the time was like retiring in a year. Like he was like a male, like it was like so many factors. And I think that this exists with so many women who are 8 type personalities too, or any personality, but it's just like, it's like, you want, when you think you're going to get married and the next step is to have a family, and you have lots of pressure of family asking you when that's happening. It's very natural. So when are the kids coming? When that happens and the kids aren't coming, you eventually just slowly close in. And so for me, I felt like Mark and I needed to get our shit together first on what we were good with and like what we wanted to do and how we felt, was our plan moving forward. And then we needed to navigate it. And I say the hardest part, and it still exists here, and it's really hard on my heart in Atlantic Canada, is we have extremely long wait times. The moment you decide you want to go to a fertility clinic, you can wait 8 months to a year to have that meeting at the clinic.
Just that first meeting.
And it's still, the first consult. So those 8 months when you're going through this and there's nothing you can do are beyond hard. Like, and it still exists and it's backed up because of the pandemic. So really hard, really, really hard.
You mentioned like shame and embarrassment and guilt and all of these feelings. And from what you just said, it sounds almost like a little bit of an identity crisis. Like you're used to being good at what you put your mind to and accomplishing what your goal was. And all of a sudden you can't accomplish it and it's out of your control. So like, what are you supposed to do with that? Right. That's like, you're on a whole new level there.
And you have like a husband who feels terrible. Like when it's male infertility and there's nothing they can do. And like, you have to go through that process as well. And those emotions and figure out like the way, Mark deals with emotions is completely different than me. And would never do a podcast, but he's my biggest cheerleader, And so I think like meeting him where he was at during the time and figuring that out was so important, more than like anyone else being involved at that time.
Those relational dynamics, like being able to, like you said, meet your partner where they're at, but also honoring where you're at and what you need in that time too, right? You're both dealing with it separately and together. You mentioned male infertility, and can you, both of you talk about the realities of infertility? Like, do men and women experience similar levels of infertility? Is it odd that you're both in a similar situation? Is that more common than we think? Because I'll be honest, I think when we think of infertility, because the women bear so much of this, we think it's always the women, right? Like, what can the woman do? Yeah.
So that's a great question. This is like my favorite part of the night. So you're right. When people hear fertility, especially if they're not very familiar with it, lots of times they jump to, oh, the woman can't carry a baby.
Right.
And so that's not the case at all. So about a third of the time, the issue is with the female or the person with the ovary and the eggs. And a third of the time, it's male factor or the person with the sperm. So equally, males and females carry this issue. And then another third of the time, it's unexplained. So doctors can't actually put together why this isn't happening. So the other really, I think, important piece of information that especially women, people in our age category, is that 1 in 6 Canadians, and that's likely an outdated statistic, are affected.
Wow.
That is
so 1 in 6 of your friends. So Jessica, I think it was your question when you said what would have made us more comfortable when we first were diagnosed? Like, why did we shut down? It's because people weren't talking about it. For me, I had no one in my very comfortable circle who had this issue. Not one person I knew. Well, not one person that I knew of.
Right.
Same.
And so it when I looked back, I said, I need to be vocal because I don't want other people to, because it's a big deal, but you survive it.
Right.
And you need sort of a safe space to land. And it's really important. And so I advocate and educate and encourage people. Like, I'm so excited to be here with Danielle because I feel Danielle is going to be a huge, and I know she is, but has a huge impact on so many people's lives. People look up to her and they will feel safe knowing that she has a journey and that at least a touch point, whether or not they ever connect with either of us.
Right.
They will know, okay, they turned out okay. They survived. Maybe it's, I can do this too.
And it takes it away from the what is wrong with me to the what are the issues? Like what, there's bigger issues here. It's not a me problem.
Right.
Yes.
And when you think about marriage, sorry, Danielle, but when you think about marriage, it's meant to be a 50-50. We're meant to work together. When you share your life with a partner, we say that like it's a two-way street. But then when it comes down and just from these conversations with these fertility issues, does that just go out the window of like, well, it's all my fault or but it's to get past that, right? To say like, no, like we're a team, we're in this together. We're not blaming one person over the other, right? But I can imagine how taxing that would be on a relationship, on a marriage, because I just couldn't imagine not being able to feel that way when you're in it.
Yeah.
And there's so many unknowns.
It's really hard. And I would say like we did a really good job of this because we were really good at communicating and I feel like that was everything. But I think it's really easy to like resent someone in the heat of the moment, say bad things in the heat of the moment. And we're not perfect. We've said lots of shit. But like, I think like at the end of the day, we're in this partnership together and we have the same end goal at the end of the day. And so we just had to get there as a team. And like, it's really hard, like, especially going through IVF treatments, you're so vulnerable and your husband's in the room with you going through IVF treatments. Like there is nothing more vulnerable. I mean, obviously having a child is the same, but like, it's really tough. Like it's really tough. Like I felt really, really vulnerable.
Absolutely.
And I think too, you said the 1 in 6 stat, which it may be outdated, which is right. Like that, it's more common than we think. And then we're talking about, and I was reminded of like the miscarriage stat of 1 in 4, very similarly, you're experiencing that and you're saying, well, I don't know anyone who went through it. And when my husband and I went through it, my husband, that's the first thing he said, why we don't know anyone this happened to. And I said, actually, I could name 5 of our close friends it's happened to. They just don't talk to you about it. We don't talk about it with one another. And it's not that you want other people to be experiencing it, but it does give you some sense of like, okay, this happens. And then their stories and they've gone on to have kids or whatever. So that normalizing piece is so important, right? Maybe talk a little bit about how does one determine, Danielle, you said it was a year, Carolyn, I'm not sure your timeline specifically, but how does one determine between infertility and trying to conceive? Like break down some of that inaccurate ideas that it's easy to get pregnant. Growing up, you're taught like, don't have sex, you'll have pregnant. So in our minds, we're like, this is so easy. When we decide we want kids, we'll have sex and get pregnant just like that. And it's so much more complicated than that. Totally. So how does someone know, I think it's each cycle you have like a 20% chance it'll work and an 80% chance it won't. And I think we think the opposite often, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So at what point do you decide that this is infertility and this is just, it hasn't happened yet? So
great question. You ladies are just amazing. So, Sarah, as you said, like we're taught, we do sex ed, but when have any of your physicians spoken to you about your fertility between the ages of 18 to now?
Never. Except it would be like, don't get an STD. I think that was maybe it.
My doctor has 100% like, when are you going to start having kids? When is the next, but like never talked about what that process could look like. So interesting that you say that, Carolyn, because Right.
So whose responsibility is it for the conversation to start? Because it affects so many people. And what's happening is women, I use women and I don't like to put the blame on women, but the reality is we do have a
different role.
Right. Yeah. And our reproductive health timeline is much shorter.
Right.
Like fertility starts to decline in our late 20s.
Right.
And really takes a significant drop at 35, 36. And by the time you're 40, 41, 42, your egg reserve is diminished and or like your eggs are old and
right.
And it becomes very challenging to conceive. So reproductive education needs to be part of the conversation just as much as, the sex ed piece, especially for people, sort of in the university ages. If you're a female, for example, who's going to university, secondary education, post-secondary, if you're going into a professional study, having those conversations with your medical professional is really important because your time to start having a family is really delayed. So the average time, what people are starting to have families now is like 30, 31 maybe in Canada.
Right. Yeah.
And so what's happening is people are finding out at that age that they have a problem that they could have fixed in their 20s. Maybe they would choose to freeze their eggs.
Right.
Maybe that was an option. Maybe they were someone who doesn't necessarily have a partner. Society tells us, go to school, get an education, find a partner, travel, get married, buy a house, like do it in this order, then have your family, have your fun, then have your family. But physiologically, we haven't caught up to that as women, especially now. Male fertility does have a decline as well, but not as significantly as women. And so I think that that's a really important conversation when our doctors having this conversation, and it's part of our job. I feel very responsible. I feel the responsibility of my organization to continue to educate, to advocate, to encourage and inspire people to talk about their journeys. And if you have a story that you're talking to your friends and family who are younger about this, so that's something that they consider too. It doesn't mean that there's going to be an issue, but just say there are some simple tests that you can have done at your GP when you're in your mid to late 20s to say, let's check egg quality, like your ovarian reserve, just so like if there's a potential issue, likely there won't be, but if there is, catch it now and not in 5 or 6 years when it could be too late.
And it's all about that normalizing it, that
that's
this could be a thing.
Could be.
Like just be like, it should just be like another option on the menu.
Absolutely.
Instead of you have like, oh my God, I don't even know if I can bring this up with my doctor. Like,
yes, it shouldn't, and it should
pull the curtain back on it.
Yeah, like you're not broken. Like it's just, you know what I mean? Because I feel like it's that piece of like, it's not talked about, it's not discussed at the doctor's office. Like that was a huge wow moment when you said that, Carolyn, like, wow, yeah, it's never discussed. And so then when it happens, it's like, well, shit, like I'm broken, my partner's broken, but no, that's not the case, but that's how I'm assuming would be left feeling. Right. And so just at a loss, because it's like you said, Danielle, like where in the hell do we start now? Right.
Yeah.
And what you have celebrities, Janet Jackson, like older celebrities who are having babies, which is amazing. But there's sometimes parts of the stories that we're missing. So what we hear is you can get pregnant at 50.
Right.
What we didn't hear is she used donor eggs or she froze her eggs at a younger age. So there's a piece of the story that's doing a disservice to the population of people, because all of those things are normal things. It's just we have to have the complete story so that people who don't have experience here are making informed decisions.
Right. Putting it in context for them. And I imagine too, if you're looking at the time and space of it all and place of it all, finding that information out in your early 20s when you think like that might be a decision I come to at the, years from now or down the road, I think you probably have a different emotional reaction to it than when you're so invested and you're ready to start the journey and you're like, okay, let's do it now. We're going to have kids. And then you have the financial and personal and biological stress of it all, emotional stress of it all. And then you're trying to figure out this information at that time, right? Like how can you take all of that in under that type of those many stressors? It's so,
and one of the other things that I'll quickly add is that a lot of times, if you are struggling and you do speak to your doctor, the information comes back and they say, have you been trying for a year? You need to try for a year. You're healthy. Try for a year. And that is so challenging sometimes. So in what they say is infertility is the inability to conceive after 12 months of unprotected intercourse. If you're under the age of 35 and healthy, over the age of 35, it's 6 months.
Okay.
However, if you have a long-standing, if you have PCOS or endometriosis, don't wait a year. If there is something else, if you have a history of STDs, like there's a lot of stuff that can impact your fertility, and waiting a year could be very detrimental. And that's information that people are getting from their doctors. I'm familiar with one story of a young couple. They got married in their early 20s, and their doctor told them for over 3 years that they didn't have a problem. They were young and healthy. And it turns out she had low ovarian reserve and ended up needing IVF that could have been prevented by the time she actually saw a doctor. I think it was 5 or 6 years later. And it could have been prevented if she'd seen a fertility specialist, or it could have been a lot easier. She'd been seen by a specialist earlier, but people don't know that they should have those conversations.
Can you self-refer to, like, so the fertility clinic in Nova Scotia is called the AART is the acronym, and the ART, as I call it, but
Yes.
Can you self-refer to it?
Yes, you can in Nova
So
Scotia.
a lot of people don't know that. And so there's a fantastic private Facebook group for this clinic. It is not run by the clinic. It's run by couples who are going through this, or individuals, same sex. There's everything you can think of in this group in terms of topics. And so it's private. You have to request to join. Anyone can message myself or Carolyn and we can invite you into it. But that was like my go-to in terms of fertility in Atlantic Canada, because you can literally just search anything. You can find out information about surrogacy, find out information about donors, you can find out information about wait times, like everything you need is in this group, and it's all active people. And I'm still in the group because I'm still plugged into the community.
Yeah, that's so
I was just going to say you and Carolyn talk about how you do have very similar experiences, but I wanted to bring it back to your journey to say, okay, you decided, you and Mark had the conversations, you decided that you do want a family and you do want to go through with it. 8 months to a year, bring us back to that. So, you're at that point, and what's next?
So our first, after that, we said, let's, get on the wait list for the fertility clinic in Atlantic Canada, the ART, or in Nova Scotia, I should say. And so we had our appointment, I would say probably 8 to 9 months after that decision. And then from there, that was when we really got verified that there was male factor infertility at the fertility clinic. And so from there, then we were presented with some options. And, we liked the options, but wanted to kind of look into different things that might be out there for us. And so our journey led us into exploring adoption in Nova Scotia. And so at the time, we just weren't really sure if we wanted to go through fertility treatment. So we decided to do the adoption course in the province. And oh my gosh, it was such a crazy time. We were like running the company, and we would go to the Cambridge Suites in Sydney at night every week for 4 hours and do the adoption course. It's like a long, I think it's like over 40 hours. And so we did that course and did the intake form. We went through this grueling process of adoption. And we, as entrepreneurs, we were treated very like high risk, I would say, for families, which was really frustrating for me. And so because we had just got started, they really look for income stability, and they look for longevity in your careers, which at the time when you're in your late 20s, like who has longevity in anything? And we said that we would take up to 3 children, sibling sex, could have family vote for us. We would do anything. And so went through that process, realized like how many people are in foster care in our province. The stats are alarming. How many were in foster care in Cape Breton? And I got really, passionate about that. And then we had learned about another clinic. So while we were going through the adoption process in Nova Scotia, which takes an extremely long time right now, like years. And so we stayed on that journey, but I was still like hell-bent on trying to figure out a solution that might work for us. And so we heard about, we had talked to a family member who I'm not that close with, wasn't at the time, I am now. And I reached out to her because she had adopted her son 16 years ago, and it was my mom's cousin. So very kind of instant. And asked her about that process, and just said, we're going through it. I hardly know you, but I just want to know how you felt. How has it been in the end and all that? So she told me about a couple who had just traveled to a clinic in Prague, in Czech. And so this clinic is like a world-renowned clinic. Tons of couples from Canada go to it, and all over the world. They have a close relationship with the clinic in Nova Scotia, the Art, which I didn't know at the time. I had no idea about this clinic, but they offer lots of solutions that aren't existing in Canada right now. And so I started exploring that route and said, she got us in touch with this couple who had just went to that clinic and had just had birthed a daughter. And so we get on the phone with this couple, and I was like, this is it. Like, I think this is our solution. Like, we can still go through adoption in Nova Scotia, and we'll do both paths at the same time and see where we land. And so from there, went back to Fertility Clinic in Nova Scotia. They authorized us to be able to pursue Prague, the clinic in Prague. We started that process, and in October of 2017, we did our first trip to Prague. And so I had launched Anchored Ideas that June, and Danielle, my business partner, and I had very honest conversations about our family, because at that time we were at that point where we were starting our families and starting the business. So we were very frank and saying, here's where I'm at. Here's where I'm at. We both wanted children. We just said we would make it work, and we would have each other's back no matter what during this time. And that was before we had children. And that is like something I will hold forever, grateful, because she just is my rock. And so we had launched in June. I started fertility treatments, medications in like July and August. And then September, during that process. And then October, we did our first trip to Prague. And so during that time, like, you're 2 weeks kind of down there and recovering. And so Danielle would just like block, because I wasn't comfortable talking about it, and didn't share it with anyone besides a really close family and friends. And so I would just be emailing from Prague, and she would say, what, like, just do your thing. Like, you got this. And we just like carried on. So I was really living like two lives for a long time. And I just, I don't know what I would be like now. I think a lot of time has passed. And I think I would have done things differently, but at the time I was just going through the emotions of like having to bucket it. Right. And this is my path, and this is my path. And I have goals for each. And so, so that's how we got started. And we did 3 trips to Prague in total, which I'm happy to get into. But the first time we transferred 2 embryos. The second time we transferred 1, and we went in August 2018. And then the third time we went in April 2019, and we transferred another 2 embryos. And that's where we had our baby girls, Audrey and Sophie. And so it was an insane 3 years. And I lived that entire moment basically as 2 people. Yeah. And so I felt like I just like had to protect my heart, and had my really close friends and family who were there and in our corner. And, hard miscarriages in between that were extremely emotional for all of us, as miscarriages are for anyone, and hurtful. And so we just, kept our eye on the prize. And I think like I wasn't ready to go back for that third one. And I waited a while, and I really didn't know if I was going to go. And my girlfriends, like Mark, was ready. He wanted to go. Like, and I just didn't know if my heart could take it. And I had like kind of started emotionally moving on. And we had gone away on a girls' trip, and the girls were like, "You got to go. Like, they're ready for you. The embryos, like you just got to go, like one more shot." And then I was going to close that book and say, this is our path. And I went, like, this was in March, and we were there the first week of April doing that transfer. Wow. And had I not been vulnerable with my friends, I wouldn't have gone. Like, it's amazing. Yeah.
And like, wow. I'm just really emotional right now, but I'm not supposed to be the one crying. What is happening? I just keep thinking about those two girls, and they are just
I
so
know.
like,
Thank God you went.
Yeah. Jessica's our sleep trainer now. We've had her 3 times.
that's not why I'm crying, but like, oh my God, like,
No,
you know?
yeah, like they're incredibly, and it's like Carolyn will say the same, you guys will say the same, like children will change your life. Like they are everything, and we wanted them more than anything in the world. And thank God there's 2 of them, like, for us, like we wanted that. And I didn't know if I could go back another time, like, because I had such a really hard pregnancy as well with them. And so, you get really great supports, and there's amazing supports. Like there's so many between naturopaths and yoga, and we'll talk about that. I think it's really important for us to all talk about supports, but yeah, we're just thankful for Prague, and like that was our path. And I've now have 2 really close like friends who have gone there, and have gone to the same clinic with the same coordinator and the same doctor.
And
I've been open.
And you talked about like how you were like emotionally moving on, like you were ready to close that chapter. Like, I think too, I'm so emotional because like how many people get to that point where they just have to close the chapter, right? Like they,
yeah. I just like couldn't handle it. Like my heart couldn't handle it anymore. And, like everything, it affects everything and everyone, and families are sad for you. Like everyone's in it. And you just have to get to a point where it's like, okay, this is what we're doing. And then for me, I was like, this is where our line was emotionally and financially. I mean,
yes, absolutely.
Right.
But yeah, like it just, the medications wear on you. Carolyn will talk to that about that too. But I really like wasn't myself on the medications, and I'm still not. It's because I was on fertility meds for like 4 years. They're like that doesn't go away. And like, it really, 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 really is hard. And so like, I think that's like, I was so like ready to just be off the meds and get back to like what I felt was normal. Anyway, thank God we went one more time.
And it's, I can't imagine we go back to that relationship piece, right? When you say like Mark was ready to go, and obviously Mark's dealing with this whole experience as well, but in a different way, right? Like it's your body and your hormones and there's a whole mental piece to that too. When you carry it and it doesn't 100%. Work, and you carry it and it doesn't work, you don't know if you can do that again. Like I
was getting caught up in the micro process of it and not the end goal. Like, and that's where Mark, like, he's always like that with me. Like, he's always like, here's your goal. Like, let's get there. Right. Like, he's always a big guy. And so he knew that's what we wanted. We always wanted that. And for me, I was in that moment of being like, this is so hard. And this is like, just so hard on us, and emotionally it's taken a toll on our relationship. Like something has to just stop right now.
Yeah. And you have to compartmentalize, I assume, like you said, you're living 2 separate lives. And I think that's probably survival in that piece, right? Like in order to be able to do both of those things and all of those things, you had to keep them separate, like for your own sanity at that point, I'm sure.
I did, for sure. Like I definitely did. Yeah. But I was so honest with our team. And Danielle, like it was so important for the team to be knowing what was going on and to kind of be there and be okay with it in our company and in our companies, like, because, we wanted them to know that, like, when we were sad, they could be sad with us. When we were happy, they could be happy. Like, I wear my heart on my sleeve, and I run, like, that's how we run businesses. Like, I'm all in, I'm all hard, and like, I don't apologize for it. And I don't like playing hardball. And so for me, like, I was all in, and if you know me, you know everything, but this was a piece I really had to figure out, okay, what bucket am I gonna, like,
and Danielle, you like, it really spoke to me, and I could tell Sarah too with her reaction, that like that supportive piece from Danielle as a team was key in the success as well. Because if you didn't have her support, how far could it have gone? And it makes me think about how many people don't have that piece. Like you were saying, Carolyn, like the amount of work you have to take off. Like there's so much that goes into it. Like, okay, so you do get, the confirmation, you get the diagnosis, but then it's like, there are so many other hurdles you have to go through. Like, okay, financial, that's one piece, but then the other piece is sick time. Like, you think about sick days, some places you get like 3 sick days a year. So where does
So-
that piece come in? There's there's a lack of support from a professional standpoint as well, right?
Absolutely.
And from the workplace.
Definitely. And it's a very challenging piece of the puzzle. So like infertility is so complex. It is so far beyond just this medical thing that you have to do to get to a baby, the financial, the relationships, but work. And what happens, I, thank God, also had a very supportive team at work when I first went through it. And then of course, when I went through it again, I was with a different employer who I work for now. So that was a different, experience for sure. But when you are unable to have those conversations with your management team, with your coworkers, it creates a really challenging dynamic. So we have launched a program called Fertility Benefits Matter. So to talk to your employers, encouraging employers and insurance companies to add fertility benefits to help cover the cost, and also encouraging employees to speak to their insurance companies or employers or HR departments to add it in, because not only are we in the great
reshuffle, resignation.
So we're looking for, businesses are looking for young talent. We know, like, research shows that organizations like Facebook, Starbucks, sort of all the high tech stuff, Manulife, TD, they're all putting these benefits in, and they attract and retain young talent. Professionals will stay and overlook sort of some of the shortcomings of their employer. And when you can have a more open conversation with your manager, because there's a lot of morning appointments. There are some times when you'll be at a clinic every single morning for 2 weeks. And what?
We would have to move to
That's right.
Halifax, move to Prague.
Yeah.
Right.
Like it was
and how I was fortunate because both times I cycled, I lived in the city where my clinic was. But what happens when you live in Sydney and have to drive 4 hours to Halifax? It is impossible. There was at one point I was traveling 2 hours every other morning. I would drive to Halifax in the morning and drive back before my workday started to cycle. And that was only a 2-hour drive from where I am.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you're in Thunder Bay, or how about this? How about if we're in Newfoundland and there's no fertility clinic at all, and you have to get on an airplane? So add that cost and those time off. So you don't have
And if you
those
don't have family to stay with, or
That's right.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
And most times you don't want to stay with family. You feel like shit.
Right.
You're not yourself, and you're emotional, and you're crying 24/7, and you don't want to tell other people who aren't already in your bubble. We didn't even call friends when we were in Halifax. Like we were so low key because our close bubble knew, and that was it. And like, you don't want to be around anyone during this time. Like, it is not a pretty time that's how I felt on medication.
Yeah.
So
And you're
Carolyn,
injecting. Oh, go ahead.
There's a self-advocacy piece to this, right? And it comes to, there's a self-advocacy piece and a policy piece to both of these things that we just chatted about. So the doctor piece, like you have to, and Danielle, I'm so glad you asked that question, because I wondered the same thing. Can people self-refer? Can you demand your GP refer you, even if they're saying you're fine, you're healthy? Like, okay, that might be true, but can we be proactive here? So you have to get comfortable speaking for yourself, I suppose. That's a piece of it. But then the other piece, and with this like insurance policy too, is it seems like there's a lack of accurate knowledge or education, both in the medical field and elsewhere. So we need to speak up so that people respond in policymaking and in employers and in your collective agreements and in your, et cetera, human resource files. And then also, I mean, we've had a doctor on here before who even says that piece, like in general medicine, you don't spend a lot of time learning about the vagina or learning about reproductive pieces.
Right.
So even maybe a relook at what our GPs know about this, right? Like, how can we?
And that doctor, Jillian, was incredible. So she was my doctor for the girls. She was one of the only doctors that has experience working in fertility clinic because she was practicing in Halifax. Right. So when I met with her, she was just like, oh my God, awesome. Tell me more. Like when I told her our story and said me like, what, like how, all this stuff. Like she was like, we're going to get you through this. I felt like treated, because you also want to be treated like, this is like a crystal ball. Like,
right.
Like So I felt like she made space for me in a separate, the way I wanted to be treated, and it was incredible. But yes, we don't have enough of that for sure.
That's amazing. Heather and Haley, we've had on in season 1, and they went through art as well. And they said the same thing. It was Dr. McMullen that actually tested Haley for a reason. Heather had that testing done because of her age, but they never checked Haley for it. And Haley did have a blocked fallopian tube, and that's why the eggs weren't coming through. Like it, and people had told her, she went through tests and they couldn't figure it out, but they never tested her for that, only because she didn't reach the age, or she wasn't required because of her age or whatever. And it was Dr. McMullen who figured that out for her too. So that knowledge.
I started seeing, I started seeing in the fertility group, in the art group or Facebook recently, people who are in the group have started posting, being like, check your policy. Like, my policy just added this in. And so that's the benefit of the group. I know it's already starting to happen that policies are adding, but it's like in fine print.
Oh, wow.
There's the movement.
Yeah, Carolyn.
Yeah, the more people talk about it, they have to respond, right?
Right.
Well,
right.
And the other thing that people have to remember is that fertility doesn't just affect heterosexual couples.
Right.
And so, if you are a same-sex couple, someone in the LGBTQ community, you have a right to a family. And a lot of times you're going to need access to fertility care. And, if you're 2 men, then you have the sperm, great, but you don't have the uterus, you don't have the eggs. And who's supporting your family building journey? And how do you get access? And so what companies are doing is really recognizing the impact this has on someone's mental health, the time off work people are taking because of trips, not only because they're depressed or they're suicidal or their anxiety is through the roof, because those are all very real, but also that they're supporting more equitable, diverse, inclusive workplaces by including family building for everybody. Right. So I think that you're going to see a swing in that. Hopefully it's not happening as quick as I would like it to, but certainly it's really, really the conversations are happening. And so if anybody's listening and really wants to talk to their employer, if they visit fertilitybenefits.ca, we have a toolkit you can download, a letter template that you can send to your insurance company or your employer. Amazing. And say, and we've had people download that toolkit and use it and have had wonderful conversations with their employers. So it's not as scary,
right,
as it may seem, because especially for women, I think part of the challenge can be not wanting to talk to their employer because they don't want to affect a promotion. They don't 100%. Want to affect their longevity. They don't want to not be overlooked for something because, she's going to go on maternity leave. Right. And for our fertile friends, the majority of them are just getting pregnant and then telling their employer at a time that's appropriate for them.
Right. That they decide. Right.
Right. They decide. Right.
Yeah.
But when you're not, and you have to go through this fertility care option, it adds that layer of challenge, and it does really put a damper on the person who's going to carry the baby.
Yeah, that's right.
We when the last provincial election was happening, Carol and I went into beast mode,
which I feel like is just both of your natural states. So you just continued on in beast mode. Yes.
We went so hard. So we started writing like advocacy letters for all of the leaders who were running for premier. And so we wrote them, we were getting petitions, we got testimonials, everything, because the biggest thing is like, and Carolyn, you're going to talk about this because I'm going to botch this stat, but I believe like Nova Scotia is if not the only province in the country that doesn't have a subsidy right now for people who are going through fertility care. And so we wanted to make sure that whoever was running to be our next premier was talking about it. And they understood, like, especially Carolyn talking about same-sex couples, like it impacts everything, families, like growth of our population, women in the workforce, diversity, equity, inclusion, like everything. And so healthcare, and I mean, especially Carolyn ran with it, but we like really were pro that. And it's positive conversations are happening, which is great.
Yeah, how was the response to that?
So it was amazing. Like Danielle was instrumental in setting up several meetings. And Tim Houston and the PC party was a big part of their campaign. And I know they're going through their budgets now, so they've all received reminder letters from our organization to say we're waiting to hear what you're rolling out. So we don't know what the program is, but it's promised. And so we're hopeful that within the next few months, Nova Scotia will have that additional support. Because Jessica, to your point, we only do about a fifth of fertility cycles in Canada that we actually need to meet the people who need, like, that actually need the support.
Wow.
And not all of them are taking home babies.
Right.
So, and the biggest barrier is the financial piece. It's a huge piece. And of course, the education, knowledge, how do you know? Not everybody has access to knowledge to know that this is actually available to them.
Right.
And I think too, like, even after you finish fertility, there's an incredible community, like these fertility warriors that you figure out and find. And I have lots of friends who I've never met in person, but we're all connected through this. And this was a way I felt like I could give back in using my voice, like quietly behind the scenes. But, I knew that if I could help in any way move policy forward, that's a great use of my experience and tools and network and connection, and working with Carolyn, because Carolyn is the voice who has a Cape Breton connection and Nova Scotia passion and, wants to be part of that. And so hopefully we get to the finish line there. But, that's where I felt like me giving back has been through quiet conversations, and a lot of quiet conversations with people saying, you can do this. Here's your resources. This is who you need to connect. Like those introductions that people just need a handout. They just need to know they can reach out. They just need to know they can extend to someone, and you don't have to know them. You just have to know someone has your back.
That's incredible.
And that,
and Danielle, I just want to mention too that, like, hearing you speak today, like, I mean, we all know, like, Sarah and I have had these conversations, like, you are such a cheerleader, like, in your community, in our community, like, it is absolutely unbelievable. And it just really hit home. And you said, like, when you launched Anchored Ideas, you were going through all of this, you were over in Prague and all this was going on, but you never stopped cheering on your community. Like, that is such a weight. Like, you said you lived two lives, but, like, that must have been incredibly heavy, because to us onlookers looking in, you were just killing it. Yeah. Like,
no.
And in the midst of all of it, going through such a hard time in your relationship, in your, like, I don't know. I just think that you are a force to be reckoned with. And anyone that gets to be in your life is so lucky. Like, I just needed to say that, because I truly feel like you are such an incredible human.
No, I really appreciate that. And I certainly don't think that. And, like, I think I'm cut from a really strong cloth of men and women in my life, and that, we move forward and we coach people. And I grew up always with a full home and a full family, and, like, always just, like, there for whenever. Like, that's just in me. It's not something that I feel like I've learned. And so, I would say though, like, that my circle, as much as people say that, like, my circle has gotten very small and smaller. And as this journey has happened, I've made, like, very conscious decisions of who I want to spend my time with and who I want to be around, and who really was there for us during, like, that time we needed people who knew. And I think like as you grow, it changes, and it's okay to change. And that's been very hard for me, like, emotionally, because I have really struggled. Like, these fertility medications, when I say that I've been affected, like, everything from postpartum anxiety and depression to, and still living with it, to, like, going through fertility treatments, like, you lose friends over that sometimes, because you're not there for everyone all the time, and you're not yourself, and you have to maintain business. And, there's lots of things that have happened, but I try to take the high road, and I try to be there for people. And I think I just have to, be that way.
Mm-hmm. Danielle, you took time to meet with me to have a conversation. You were like, I think you had your girls, like, a few weeks later. You were, like, ready to pop, and you were like, yeah, sure, we'll meet for a coffee anytime. I'm like, what? Like, you have so much on your plate, but okay. And then just so happy to be there too. Like, I'll never forget that, because I was like, okay, I literally think the next time I saw you, you had the girls. Like, it was very quickly after. Yeah. But I mean, you, like, I can't imagine going through that process and having that emotional lens on all of these relationships and the support systems and making that circle small, like that is a weight as well, but a necessary one, I'm sure. And I hear you say that and it makes sense. And I'm proud of you for doing that because I know how difficult it must have been, but also Jessica's right. I mean, we've had these conversations with even other guests that like your tombstone 1,000 years from now will say like, you can do it. Like that's just you're the ultimate cheerleader of people who can do it. So we hope you felt that from like the people you needed to hear it from, right?
I know for sure. Definitely. And still do.
It's incredible.
Saint Famille has been crafting award-winning wines from the warmth and beauty of the estate vineyard for almost 30 years. Overlooking the beautiful Avon River Valley, Saint Famille's winery celebrates the coastal terroir that has been coaxed from the earth, the sun, and the vine that root the winery in stunning Falmouth, Nova Scotia. Inspired by the impressive history and winemaking tradition at Saint Famille, comes the newest addition to the lineup, Lost Belle by Saint Famille Wines. The trio of Lost Belle wines includes Rosé, Saval, and Baco Noir. The fresh look and flavors of Lost Belle set them apart from the competition. Shop on site or online for the complete wine profile, as well as unique, locally sourced items. Saint Famille ships Canada-wide. saintfamille.com. www.st-famille.com.
I do think we should chat about like the financial aspect though.
I was just going to say we did a little bit of myth busting with Heather and Haley on this. And I know they were really passionate in saying people say like, oh, $20,000 to go through IVF. If you don't have that, you can't raise a family, but no one has that ready to raise a family. That is the most.
That's just one.
Exactly. And that is the most like privileged or uneducated. I don't know what it is. Like,
that's a great term.
Right? Like you're coming from such a place of privilege if you're thinking like, oh, well, you would need that money to raise a family. Like whoever started our fertile friends or those of us who didn't go through this didn't sit down to say like, okay, did we reach $20,000 in our bank? Let's have a baby.
Right.
Like that's never a thought that we have to go through. So let's talk about that financial piece a little bit. We know there's
I have things I need.
Because we do know. And Danielle, I do want to ask you as well. You talked about you had to go to the clinic and they authorized you to go to Prague, and maybe these are two separate conversations and we can come back to that one. Or if it makes sense in this conversation, please include it too. Like what is necessary and how do you know? There's so many different things that you can go through: IVF, reciprocal IVF, IUI, ovulation inducing drugs, embryo transfers, embryo adoption. What treatments are available? How do you know which one's right for you? Does cost come into it? Are those different levels of cost and price? And do you have to sit down and figure that out? Like talk about the stressors of the financial piece to all of it.
Okay, Carolyn, you hit it off and then I'll follow up.
So on average, not everybody who has a fertility issue or needs fertility care is going to need IVF. So IVF is actually, for the listeners who don't know, is where they grow a bunch of eggs, they're all ready to ovulate at the same time, and they go in with a needle using a vaginal ultrasound, and they suck those eggs out. They put them in a dish with the sperm, and the sperm is either in the dish with the eggs and they fertilize like that, or they physically inject a single sperm cell into an egg cell. That's IVF. But we can do other things like IUI. There may be just some hormone changes. So the range is quite broad once you figure out. So number one, if you're thinking you're struggling, don't get too scary. Don't get too scared because it might not be the full Monty for you.
Right.
But you really do need to speak to an expert, and then they will do very specific tests. And part of the reason it's so expensive is because the medical technology is so expensive. And let's be very frank, if you want the best outcome to take home this baby, you want the best technology looking at your eggs and sperm and embryos. So, that's part of it. So on average in Canada, it's about $20,000 across the board. So if you're in Nova Scotia, if you're in Vancouver, if you're in Montreal, that's the cost. And about half of that, say $8,000 to $10,000 is the drugs.
So is that all of just the medical piece, or are you including like the hotels, the meals?
No, that is just the treatment.
So no travel,
no time off, no counseling, nothing.
So add on another what?
Several thousands. It depends. If you're flying from Newfoundland to Alberta every month for a couple of months.
Six flights to Prague.
Wow.
Yeah. So those are the things,
months
right? That people remortgage homes, they sell their homes, they sell everything they own. They give up jobs, they get part-time jobs. They go work at Starbucks because Starbucks has a great plan for all their employees.
Wow.
So part-time, full-time. So that's a huge piece of it. So if you're fortunate enough to have a company that eats a piece of that, say the financial piece of the medications, like that's a significant drop,
right,
in the bucket for you. And like Danielle said, Nova Scotia doesn't have coverage right now. There are currently 5 provinces in the country who have funding available. And they're all different. So some are a tax credit, some are a grant, some are a full IVF cycle. So like IVF is a full cycle is free without medication in Ontario, and Quebec has a new fully funded IVF cycle too. What's interesting is in Quebec is that they also have RAMQ, which covers medications. So the medications in Quebec has always been covered. So that's just an interesting. It's free in Quebec. Yeah, it's amazing.
So Nova Scotia is very behind.
Absolutely, definitely.
The most
well,
behind.
and it's the currently there are 2. So New Brunswick and PEI actually have programs in place. They're 2 of the 5 provinces. So it's the only maritime province that doesn't have funding. If we're not looking at Newfoundland because they're Atlantic, it's the only maritime province without funding. So, but it's coming. It's been promised, and I'm very confident. Yeah, I'm pretty confident that it's going to happen. What it will look like. Part of the challenge becomes, with tax credits, for example, that for patients, you're still you have the upfront out-of-pocket cost that you then you'll get it back or a portion of it back, but it's upfront cost. And so it'll open the doors for a lot of people. They can take a loan, a line of credit, maybe they borrow from their parents and then pay them back within 6 to 12 months, for example, and they get their tax credit back. So there's that piece, but it still won't help everybody.
Right. So it's
option.
A step forward, but it's not enough. It's not enough.
No. And really what we need is a federal sort of initiative. Listen, healthcare is delivered provincially, so it's not coming from the federal government. However, an initiative from the federal government to help work with the provinces to make it equitable so that every province, so New Brunswick, I get a $5,000 tax, like a grant back, but $5,000 for my $30,000 IVF, which is what it costs, is like not a huge piece of it. No. So I'm still paying $25,000 of it off. And then Quebec, I get their medications are covered and a full IVF cycle. So for a lot of patients, so it's not equitable or equal across the country. So we need that to happen. We live in a country where we should have equal access to healthcare.
And more inclusive, right?
Absolutely.
Well, I want to hear you say grant writing, even like some people have grants and then you have to know that they have them and how do you access them and how do you apply for those grants?
Right. That's a huge.
There's an equity piece to that, right? As well.
Wow.
Yeah.
Huge.
Yeah. So we, this is like something I very rarely have shared, but I think it's really important because it's a piece of our story. When we were going through it, so as I've talked about it was a journey of 3.5 years from start to finish. We had been starting our companies. And so at the time we had just bought our house and renovated it. And we had to figure out a way because I was uncomfortable with taking money from family because I didn't want that weight on my shoulders if it didn't work out. And it didn't work out. And I couldn't imagine just me, I just couldn't do it. And so we had already taken out, money to start the businesses and had been just getting going. And so I felt like we had to find a way that we could get through this that wasn't going to bury us getting going. And so at the time, this will be funny because Jess and Sarah, you'll remember this, the Trump bump happened.
Right.
And so it was like CB if Trump wins had happened. And this was before Airbnb had really taken off in Cape Breton. And at the time there was about 10 Airbnb listings. And I was reading up in the States on how Airbnbs were so popular and this was the new way to travel and everything. So I went and staged our home.
You are such a freaking force.
I know. I just
hosted our home and didn't tell Mark. Couldn't tell him. I couldn't even tell him. And posted our home and put that it was available from May 1st to the end of October, the end of Celtic Colors.
Oh my gosh.
And had it all ready. I went out and bought like sand buckets and beach chairs and a cooler and showed the picture because they were doing it. I was looking up Nantucket, which is like very similar to Cape Breton. So I was like, what are the island places doing? So I like copied everything, copied the description, put it up there. And 24 hours later, got in like an entire summer booked of inquiries. And I'm like, holy shit, I have to figure this. Like, I have to tell Mark, we have to figure this out. We're going to Prague in October. This was in the spring. I was just starting Anchored. And I was like, he's going to kill me. Like, he's going to kill me. This is like, so anyway, I sat him down. We had lots of drinks. And I was like, okay, I have to tell you something.
Flickered him up. Anyway, and broke the news.
Showed him. And he was like, this is brilliant. Like,
of course he did.
Like, this is brilliant. And so I had made enough to cover the entire cost of us going in October in bookings. And so we pre-bookings, like it hadn't happened, but I had booked enough. And I was like, here's it is, worked it all out, had the budget, everything. And I was like, catch is we got to move out of here for 5 months.
Right.
And we have like 2 dogs and us. And I was like, and we're going to mom and dad's. Yeah. Like, they don't know, but they want to help. This is how we're doing it. And so we moved in with my parents, God love Mark. And we lived there. And Danielle Johnson, who was my business partner, will still joke. She would come into my car and it was our house. And so for say 5 months, I would drive around and my entire SUV was like everything I owned that I loved in the backseat and in the trunk. She was like, this is hustler. Like we would. And so we did that for 3 years.
Wow,
we moved over
and
we moved back in the end of October. So that entire summer season of Cape Breton Island, we moved out for 3 years. We paid for every fertility treatment from Airbnb, and we came out of it debt free. And so if you are feeling like you can't do it for a financial reason and you're feeling strapped, if there is a will, there's a way. And I never talked about it because it was all part of it. And like we were going through, like it was just part of this craziness. And lots of people who are listening to this rented our home. Like I know lots of people who rented our home, and we had rented out for months at a time, and tons of people for 3 years. But it saved us. Like it saved us.
Cannot wait to see what your girls are going to do, because with parents like you two, like seriously. And my other thought is like, if your business isn't thriving, you need to call Danielle Patterson because oh my God, where there's a will, there's a way. But this
Danielle, it wasn't that the business was it, but we just needed a way to like earn that extra income outside of our current income. So that it was like, I could mentally be like, okay, we can do this. Like we can go another time. Like we can do this.
Danielle,
and it was
2 thoughts. That is incredible. One is I knew you Airbnb'd your house. I had not an inkling of a connection that's was why, right? Like I just thought you were
people like
you love Cape
everyone met with
Airbnb. It makes sense. Your business minded. Like why wouldn't you do that? You know what I mean? I just never thought twice about that.
Message us. And be like, I have family coming down. I hear you're running Airbnb during this on season of the island. Like, can we rent it? I'm like, sure. Give me your weeks. Like, what do you have? And so
amazing.
It was hilarious.
All those people played a little part in bringing Audrey and Sophie here.
Well, that's the other piece is for someone who is such a champion for Cape Breton Island. I am so freaking glad that Cape Breton Island gave back to you in some way, right? On season of the island, we're capitalizing on that to your gain. Like, thank goodness.
No, we ran with it.
That is incredible. We'll talk about that, Danielle, in terms of your specific experience. So you get authorized at ART to go to Prague. What does that even mean? Like, could they have said, no, you don't qualify and you don't get to go? Or could you have gone on your own? And then from that point, that
needed a clinic.
That's all of your costs from there on forward, right?
Yeah. So the way we used ours was that they became our satellite clinic. So they were the ones who would, I did all of my medications with Al, the pharmacist at Art is amazing. Everyone knows Al. And so he would like review all of the medications, translate them from Czech to English.
Wow.
We then did the translations to find out what was equivalent in Canada versus what they were prescribing. I would then go to Halifax, meet with him. And then we would, all of my scans and tests and everything was done in Halifax. And then they'd give me the okay. You'd find out 4 days before your transfer.
Oh my God.
And then we have to book the flight. So you had no idea when you were going.
So you're playing with travel too. Like you have to make sure you get a flight to Prague in those 4 days.
Everything. And so, because your time and schedule. So we would drive to Halifax, live in Halifax until we figured out like when we got the okay for scans based on our medication schedule, get the okay, go home to our Airbnb because we never stayed with family, booked our flights that night to leave like 2 days, run home, get our stuff, and then go back to Halifax, fly out. You never knew how long you were there, but you were for sure there for a week.
Oh.
And then you're home. And then during this 2-week wait, TWW, if you've ever seen hashtag TWW, that's like the hardest week in someone's life during fertility, the hardest. And that's when you aren't allowed to technically test until after the 2-week period. A lot of people do. I did it. So I was a crazy tester, and you get lots of false positives and all this stuff, but it's really hard time emotionally. And that I sometimes worked it and sometimes didn't. At the end, the third time I was like, I'm doing everything right. Like I didn't work those 2 weeks. I didn't lift anything over 10 pounds, especially traveling home from Prague. Like I gave myself the rest. I did everything that was recommended because I was all in like at the end. But it's super important to honor that time. And I think a lot of women try to get to whatever fertility care they're getting to, and then don't take that 2 weeks because you've already so much time. The 2 weeks are so critical. Like that's when it's happening. And so, yeah, it's like, it's the 2-week wait is something. Hey, Carolyn.
It is. I would say, yeah, it is probably the most challenging, certainly for me, the most challenging part of the whole, other than the initial sort of diagnosis. But once you get into things like that 2 weeks where you're just, there's nothing you can do. And then I did not test. So you have this embryo transfer, and then 2 weeks later you go back for a blood test. I didn't test with my first round of IVF, and I was like, oh, I'm pregnant. Like, why wouldn't I be pregnant? I don't have any issues. I'm 31. Like, this is happening. And then went for my blood test. The clinic calls me. I was like, I'm pregnant. And they said to me, didn't work. You're not pregnant. And I was like what the world, I always said it was like the world, like the floor fell out from underneath me because I didn't expect it. I felt pregnant. And it was probably one of the worst days of my life. And then how you move through that, because I had not prepared myself for that news. And a lot of people experience that. Like that's why people end up testing. So they take at-home pregnancy tests within that week to say, okay, like at least either way, I'll know, but you can drive yourself crazy.
Right.
Yeah, I was going crazy. I had the Amazon bulk pack and it was nuts. And I don't know, I did it every time, and knowing that it could be false positives every single time, I always did the blood test, but
trying to control some of that.
When it doesn't work the first 2 times, like you're pregnant, you're instantly pregnant when it happens. Right. And so you do get positive tests. And so, very difficult time throughout the process. But my hope is that more people take that time, for themselves and do it, as much as you can, try to just like relax.
Do you think it has to do with the piece of like, I can do it all, where you were saying like that type A personality, 2 different lives. This is one, this is the other, I just went through this, but like, I'm going to go back to work and I'm going to push through. Do you think it has to do with that piece a little bit?
I think it's just, you just want to move on. Like you just want to go back to normal life and then know that you're going to find out. But stress is a huge causer of whether things work or not work. And, like, I think it was the same after I had a miscarriage, like twice, like, I didn't give myself time to grieve. It was extremely hard. And anyone who's had a miscarriage who's listening to this will know that no one gives you a beat to take time off after having a miscarriage, and who's going to tell somebody that you work with that just happened to you. And so I think we don't give ourselves enough grace and this is why we need to normalize this, that this is so important. And it's so critical to your healing and to your, your mental well-being moving forward. It's so important.
I think that's such a crucial reminder, because I think there's so much that happens on the inside that isn't visible during that time period, that you just need to let your body do and try and assist it in any way. But when you can't see it, it is hard to like, okay, well, I feel fine, or things are working, like I'm just going to go and do my regular thing. Or in this situation, like probably past the time, if those 2 weeks are like the longest weeks of your lives, you want to stay busy. If you're just resting, you have so much time to think, you're probably trying to avoid that. 100%. But really, your body is working so hard for you inside. Like that rest is so important.
Like the first time we went for a transfer, this is insane. I transferred we transferred 2 embryos and got, pregnant with twins, and super excited, and had a family dinner with like both sets of families, siblings, like Dave and Scott were there. Like it was nuts. And so I contacted Bianca, who's a lady here who owns a wine company, and I was so excited. I got these wine bottles made with like custom labels from Jamie in our office. And it was like aunt to be, grandpa to be, like all the things are coming, like all the things you do. And it was super early on, but because we had that was our first round. We were so excited, and we knew I just like, was like, this is it. Like we got it. And so had the party, gave out the wine, toasted, had it, everything. 48 hours later, miscarried.
Danielle.
And I was like, I went to my backyard and I smashed that case of wine so much. I took the whole case and just chucked it. And I was just like so mad at myself for like sharing, and so many women go through it. And so that was a great lesson for me, that I actually loved that people knew and that they were with me, because I'm after seeing so many friends who have had miscarriages do this alone with their partner. Don't tell people within the first 12 weeks or whatever that is. I had my people, like they went through that with me. And like, I don't I just like, I felt like it was really important to have that network for me.
That is so important. My husband felt the same way, Danielle, when we miscarried. That was one of the first things out of his mouth after he yelled 1 in 4. Like they should teach you that in school. 1 in 4. Like, I don't know that, I knew it. So it was less shocking. He didn't. But then I remember on the way home, it was late at night, and he had just told one of his best friends in Toronto that day. And he said to himself, like, why did I tell him? Like, now I have to call and tell him it's not this, like, it's so uncomfortable. He's like, I'm never telling anyone again. And I remember saying, like, I'm so thankful you told him, because now you have to talk to him. Like, you have someone else outside of me to talk with, because we can't, you don't know it's 1 in 4 because people are doing what you're doing right now, and you don't want to tell anyone. Right? Like, it is so important to have that network, or at least a little bit of it that you're comfortable with.
I remember when you miscarried, and I remember thinking, like, I don't remember how much time passed, but I remember bringing it up and scared too. But then I thought, like, no one, like, when you go through that, you never forget it, right? You'll remember the day forever. You'll probably think of, this would have been the day, this would, like, I'm assuming all of those. And we talked about that, Sarah, like, you'll never forget, but the outside world does, because it's done. It's past. It's over with. That has to be incredibly difficult. But like, speaking from a friend perspective, I was scared to bring it up, but also like, I wanted to check in to say, like, how are you? Okay. Like, but it's this fine line of like, are they in the process of healing and I'm just going to open up this wound again, or what? But I think this is important a conversation to have, because 1 in 4, chances are the person sitting next to us went through this. So we need to talk about it. Like, what are we saying? When are we checking in? Is it okay to check in? Like, can we talk about that a little bit?
100%. Go ahead, Carolyn.
I think this is such an important conversation, and not only for infertility, but also for miscarriage and recurrent pregnancy loss, because they really can be intimately connected. A lot of times the recurrent pregnancy loss could be because you have infertility, or would cause the infertility. So it's one of the reasons I think it's really important to open up to a couple of people. If you're like, you have to find your network, like you have to find your safe space. And I'm not saying you have to put it on Facebook that we're struggling with infertility. However, you can find a couple of people like Danielle did to say, okay, this is once you're ready. And I think one of the things that people don't connect with enough are reproductive counselors. So there are people who, whether they're social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists, whatever, that deal with infertility. And a lot of them have been patients themselves. And so can talk you through sort of the tools that you need to deal with a lot of this stuff. Because as someone who struggles to get pregnant, and you're likely in a friends network of people who are getting pregnant and calling you with a pregnancy announcement, then there's the baby shower, and you're going to Christmas dinner and there's all kinds of kids, or people are saying, oh, you've been married like for 2 years, like when you're having kids. So what happens is people are already down. And although none of these things are done to hurt anybody, it causes someone who's feeling really isolated anyway to retreat, especially people. I did it. I missed all kinds of things. I avoided people. I avoided conversations. I broke friendships because of that. And people knew I was struggling with infertility, but probably at the time certainly didn't realize why I was being. It probably appeared that I was just being a bad friend.
Right.
And so equally as important. So I think it's, sometimes it's challenging. And I've seen in the fertility community, people get upset. They're like, you shouldn't have said this. And these are the things that people say to us that really trigger me. But I think it's really important as a patient or someone who's going through this to recognize what triggers you, to avoid those things or learn how to avoid those things and speak to someone in a professional manner to help you do that. So you have the tools to deal with it, but also to then educate some people, especially your safe network, to say, okay, I know you want to help me, then maybe just ask. Like, you don't always know what to say. And it's okay as a friend or someone supporting these people to say, I don't know what you're going through. I haven't experienced it, but I want to help you. I want to be there for you. Will you tell me? Can you tell me what you need? Will you let me know? Because I want to be there. I just want to make sure that I'm doing it in a way that is supportive to you.
Right. There's it. That's it right there. Yes.
Because not everybody wants a girlfriend to come over and sit with them and drink wine, or maybe it's a walk. Maybe it's, I don't know, a text message every few days just to say, you don't need to respond. I just wanted to let you know I'm thinking about you. Right. Let me know when you want to have a coffee or watch a movie.
Yeah,
just lending out that support. And I like how you said, like, whatever way it looks like for you, because it's like I said, like, you don't know, is it okay? Should I be? But yes, right.
Yeah. And it's okay to ask. I think that's important. Ask your friend. And it's a two-way street. So you can ask and you may be shut down with a cold shoulder, or that person may say, oh, I should really consider that does feel like a safe space for me. It's definitely a two-way street, and it's scary for people, and relationships you'll see it. Friends groups separate, especially the couple that's struggling. And when all of a sudden your Friday nights and Saturday night parties turn into Sunday afternoon and evening family dinner, barbecues in the summer,
right.
Like, it's very challenging for a couple who is really struggling and doesn't have a baby to attend, because it's really hurtful and not so intentionally. It's just struggling.
Right. Yeah. So that's another piece for us too. Just like, we need to probably like look at our relationships with a closer lens to say, like, to ask the question of why, because I think it's so easy for us to like get our backs up. Why is this person not coming around? It must be because they don't, or what did I say? Or what did I do? But really, like, it's not about us.
Right.
It's about,
no.
Like,
and maybe creating what you can do, is create space or opportunities to get together with your friends without kids.
Right.
100%.
Let's go out for dinner, no kids, and no kid talk. Or, you could be at a party, for example, and someone's talking about kids, or and if you're with someone, say it was Danielle and I, before Danielle, her girls were born, and we were in a conversation, and someone was either talking a lot about their kids at school and da 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 da, or asking Danielle. Then I, as the friend who knew, the other people wouldn't necessarily have known. I could say, Danielle, will you come to the kitchen and help me make the coffee, the tea, pour the wine? Let's get Danielle into a safer space.
Right.
So it eliminates some of that, because the reality is you can't avoid it altogether. That's something that the person has to learn to kind of manage, but you can certainly be there quietly to help them remove themselves from a situation to make them feel more comfortable.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And I felt like I experienced all of that and more. And for me, it was like very hard because we're very friend oriented people. We were living in, St. John's, Newfoundland and Fort Lauderdale before we moved back home, and started fertility journeys pretty quickly after. So for a long time of our life, 8 years was just our friends, and like they were our family. So I value like my friendships so much. And so during that time, so you would think this is over the course of now 6 years, any friend who has a child under the age of 6 would have gone through this during our treatments. And so I didn't know, because the process changes throughout your journey of your comfort level. In the beginning, you don't know like how upset you are versus after you've gone through a couple of treatments, it gets a little bit more isolating. And so your mind, it does change like as that process happens. So I would check in with that friend, like, and know that what they were doing 6 months ago may not be okay right now, just because of where they're at with their process and journey. And so for me, I would really get a little bit upset and offended when we stopped getting invited to like birthday parties for our friends' kids. And I felt like I was like the hype aunt for so many years, and like really involved in friends, their children's lives. And then when we were going through the journey and you don't have children, you just get off the list because you're within your friend group, and like, they're just like, oh, they probably don't want to come to the party, or like, oh, it'd be too hard for them. Like they made the assumption.
Right.
And so I would always say, like, extend the invitation, let your friend, and know that if they say no, it's okay. It's not a big deal. Like give them the space, but like invite them in. And so, or have the conversation with them. And then also what happened to us a lot was that we had a lot of friends who would not tell us that they were pregnant because they didn't know how to have the conversation. And it was out of pure, probably love most of the time, saying, I can't do it. Danielle and Mark are like so sad. They're going through this journey. Like this is going to crush them. Like this is going to, like, I can't do it. I don't want to hurt them. And so, and it did hurt sometimes, but like, that was hard conversations we got through. And some of our friends, like I have a really, really close friend who didn't tell us she was pregnant until like 22 weeks. Wow. And that was beyond hurtful for me. Like I felt like I'd been there, and just like, that was so hurtful for me. And so that's when my circle started getting a little smaller, when I was like, okay, this is my network. This is the people that fill my cup right now. And this is who I need to be with. And it's nothing against this group. It's just like, I have to just like do whatever I can do to protect my mental health.
Absolutely.
You have to set those boundaries.
It's really hard. And I understand, because I go through it now on my side. I have lots of people that I was on the fertility journey with. And so we were like fertility warriors. We got through it. Mark and I on the other side, I know they're going to get through it, but they're not there yet. So I want to still be there and be the coach and cheerleader and help, but their circle's gotten smaller. They, don't necessarily feel comfortable reaching out to us as much as they used to, or me personally, and that's been hard, because like I haven't changed. It's just my life has changed a little bit, but I understand the place that they're in right now and how difficult it could be, because it's very hard to see someone who you're going through on that journey get actually pregnant, or if you both miscarried together as friends, or like any life experience. I'm hyper aware of it now, but it was very difficult at the time, and still is in some ways.
And they're doing it to protect themselves, right? Like you now have the lens to be able to understand that and know that. 100%. And I think, Jessica, what you asked in the beginning, and Carolyn, I think, said it so well, like asking them how to be there for them, or just showing up in ways without being too invasive, but just saying, I'm here and here's something, and I'm thinking of you, and I'm here when you need me, et cetera. But I think what you said, like being fearful of bringing it up or saying the wrong thing, I think you'll never remind, as a friend or supporter, you're never going to remind them of something they stopped thinking about. They're always thinking about it in some way. Right. So I think take that fear out of it. Like you're not going to say like, oh, I don't want to ask them in case I bring it up.
Oh, and I didn't mean to insult that. Like you would be thinking about it.
No,
I was just
no,
thinking like,
I think that's a fair question. I think we all think of that. I've thought about that too. I don't want to, bring it back up or open the wound, but I think that person is always thinking about it in some way or some level. And I think they just appreciate the thought from a friend in whatever capacity. And I think we have to trust our friends that they'll let us know in some ways that thanks for asking, how are you doing today, means don't talk about it anymore. Right. Or like if they change the subject or like pulling from those cues of, I appreciate the thought. How's your day going? Like, or it's like, oh, I appreciate the thought. Let's go get a coffee so I can vent about it. Like, I think they'll lead you on what they need in those moments. Lead us.
And like going on things like, so it was really important for us to like do things with our friends without kids sometimes. Like if I wasn't going to a birthday party or something or an afternoon barbecue, I'd always text someone and be like, listen, this is it. Just deal with it. Like you or a family event, like especially at Christmas time, it's such a trigger and everyone's home with their kids and everyone's home with their family and the family's growing and the next generation's there and everyone's got the new stockings and the new Christmas balls with the baby's name on it. And if I see a baby's first Christmas ball one more time going through my journey, I was going to smash it. And so I was just like, I just couldn't do it. Like there was a couple Christmas events I just could not go to. And so we we gave ourselves permission to say no. And thank God for COVID now. You can do that and still do the thing. But yes, it's very important. And going away, like, so my girls, like our girls here, we in 2017 started going away on girl weekends and we do it every 3 months and we go away somewhere. We always stay on the island. We go somewhere fun for a night, no kids, no husbands. We rip it up. And from there, like we have had like family losses, parent losses, new businesses, are like losses. Like we have gone through everything. And I felt like those are like the weekends that really fill my cup and all of the cups. And, from there we've launched side hustles. Like,
I know we're here for it all.
Queen.
On board. So
those are the weekends. Like we've literally done that over the weekend. Be like, okay, how are we getting this business launched? What are we doing? Like, I just feel like finding your tribe and loving them hard and knowing that they are there for you. Like no judgment was like everything for getting through it. Getting through your relationship.
Yeah, that's amazing. Those weekends of like refresh and just connection in that like authentic way is so important.
Disconnect to reconnect.
Yes,
that's right.
I love that.
Okay,
disconnect
love
to
that.
reconnect.
We'll make a shirt with that saying too. Every episode, we're like, okay, we're gonna get merch, and this
the new slogan.
Say.
Yeah, hilarious.
Danielle, if you're comfortable, can you tell us a little bit about why, for those listening who don't know, why Prague? What are they doing there that's different, maybe than in Canada? And with each treatment that you had and each cycle that you had, was it the same type of treatment each time? Was there differences in that? What did that look like for you?
So we have made the decision not to share exactly what we did because I think I want my daughters to know before anyone else.
That is so special.
And
so
I
smart.
have protected that. And I'm happy and I share it one-on-one with anyone who reaches out to me. And I'm happy to do that. But I feel like there has to be something that isn't in the world before they know so that they can deal with it and live with it and know together that they have each other and I have their back. And I didn't, I want their journey to be their journey to tell.
Danielle, that foresight is so incredible. That's amazing.
I have talked a lot about it. Carolyn, now it was like and Kathleen, I was like, Kathleen and I talk about this all the time. And so like, I struggle with it because I do want to share it and I do want to talk about every single piece, but Prague was right for us and Prague was special for us. And there's treatments that are happening there that don't happen in Canada right now. And so I'm happy to have that conversation with someone one-on-one, but I just feel like it's their story and and the other thing is we're going to be so completely open with them. From the beginning, we already are open with them and they know their journey and like they will know their journey when their time is right as they progress. But I feel like it's their their journey, and we got them to this point, and now they're gonna carry it.
That's
What
amazing.
lucky children to have
Yeah,
parents like you.
seriously.
Like,
That's
I've been
incredible.
thinking about that this whole episode. Like, those girls are the luckiest.
Yeah.
Like, what a jackpot. Like,
It's
oh my
incredible.
gosh. Amazing.
Carolyn, maybe
Amazing.
you can speak to that in the sense that, not particular to Danielle and Mark's story, but in the sense that Prague and maybe other places in the world are doing things that Canada isn't doing yet. So from a country perspective, is that more the healthcare line? Does Fertility Matters Canada have these conversations? What does that look like from your perspective in your professional role?
So I think, Canada is definitely a leader in fertility care treatment options. Absolutely. So I think it really depends for a lot of people, and probably a lot in Atlantic Canada too. Like, there are 2 clinics for the 4 Atlantic provinces. One is in New Brunswick, one is in Halifax or in Nova Scotia. So, that creates challenges in itself. There's smaller clinics. They do have long wait times. So a lot of times, if patients are choosing to go to other provinces, for example, or going outside these 2 Canadian clinics, they're traveling anyway. So Prague, as an example, and many European clinics have amazing reputations. It allows a couple to sort of escape for 2 weeks. They're off. They're taking time. That Danielle had said it was so important to sort of do treatment with a similar, probably potentially a similar cost associated with, for example, traveling to Toronto or Montreal or Calgary or Vancouver. So a lot of times when patients travel, it's because of that. There are options there, and they're choosing, not because they necessarily can't get it in Canada. They may not be able to get it at their clinic for sure. But if they're going to travel, for example, then maybe they do take that time away and go to a clinic where they are truly away from work and life and all of the other stuff, and can make a connection. Then they come back home, and there is some, like Danielle had mentioned, satellite monitoring. So you do have to have a relationship with a local clinic. A lot of times you go in for blood work, ultrasounds, to do some of those things in the prep work of going to travel. But Canada is definitely a leader in the fertility sphere. I'm very confident with the physicians and the staff and the embryologists that we have, especially that we work with. One of our biggest challenges in Canada is the number of clinics. In our entire country, we have about 35, 36, maybe 37.
Wow.
Which, when you think, and 17 to 18 are in the Greater Toronto area.
Wow.
So 20 for the rest of the country.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
So when you think about access, that's a huge challenge for Canada. So we don't have, it's not provincially supported medical care, which means not everybody's accessing it, which also means that there's not enough clinics, because there would be more clinics if we did have more support for this. Like, there would be more clinics because we'd be doing more treatment.
Right. Can you go back to the provincial piece? Does that mean, I know especially during COVID and for other health issues, like, you can't necessarily go to another province because of the provincial healthcare. So if there's 37 clinics across the country, can you go to the different provinces to access those clinics?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
Yeah, you can. But there's medical, so you have to follow the sort of public health guidelines for travel. Some people were traveling for, especially at the first few months, I suppose, you travel for 2 weeks, quarantine,
Right.
then go to the clinic to do your treatment.
Right.
And then come back and quarantine in your province on the other side.
Right. But even pre-COVID, you can go interprovincially.
Absolutely.
Okay.
You can. Now, if you're out of province, so you can't. So if you're going to Ontario for your treatment, you don't, because you're not a OHIP, you don't have Ontario health coverage.
Right.
You don't get a free cycle because you live in another province.
Right.
But absolutely. What's really, I think, part of the silver lining of COVID, especially probably in a lot of medical care, is that, but in particular, fertility treatments, the number of treatment cycles and the number of women or people with eggs freezing their eggs really went up.
Okay.
And yeah, so I think for several reasons is what I'm learning. People are now working from home, so they have a bit more flexibility in work day, work time to actually access a clinic. You can
Wow.
go for an appointment, get back and do your work without anybody ever knowing. And probably a lot of people looking at sort of what's important in life. Where are we? Are we going to do this now? It's uncertain. And I mean, we just went through our lowest birth rate ever as a country when we were anticipating the COVID baby boom. It didn't happen. So now we're living in a country, in a world where this drastic, a decrease in birth rate, an increase in fertility rate. Like we really are in this space of needing sort of federal policy to help us.
Like the time is now. Like there has to be a response to this.
Absolutely.
Carolyn, I'm so conscious and appreciative of your conscious use of language through this chat. So I've noticed that you've been saying like women or people with ovaries, right? And that was one of our questions that Jessica and I were wondering when it comes to the language around infertility. And this might be a piece from the supporter side, Jess, how we were saying like, how do we support you and how do we ask? And we're scared to say the wrong thing, or we want to make sure we're asking the right questions. What language use around infertility in Canada needs to be re-examined or evolved, or are we doing well in that area? What is some of the language piece there that we need to discuss in terms of what's helpful and what's harmful?
Sure. So I think the term infertility certainly is not inclusive because a lot of people, and it's part of the reason. So my organization, Fertility Matters Canada, at one point was the Infertility Awareness Association of Canada. And we rebranded 7 years ago because it wasn't inclusive to all of the people that we support. When you hear infertility, people, for example, in the LGBTQ community, don't necessarily consider themselves infertile. They don't. That doesn't resonate to them. It also has a really negative sort of tone,
connotation,
right? So when we talk about fertility and reproductive health, I think that's a really, and across the reproductive spectrum. So I sit on several global patient groups, and I'm always learning from sort of different countries and their leaders who are, sort of in this very similar situation of what is the language we're using, what is inclusive. But I think, and I am still learning. So as an organization, we are making, we're changing how we operate and we're, really learning how to be more inclusive and be allies as an organization. And so I don't always get it right, but I'm really trying with my language to make sure that not everybody, identifies as a woman or a female. And so it's the person who has the eggs, because you could have a trans couple and someone has the eggs to use, but they don't identify as a woman. So, so I think that's just an important thing to just be aware of and be conscious and respectful of. And so it's a huge piece of the conversation, but I veer away from the word infertility a lot. I'll use it. But I do say people like we access fertility care, not infertility treatment, because not everybody needs treatment. So they need care.
So good.
I think that's incredible. I think that's totally will change the entire narrative. Like talking about the time is now and the policy needed and the changes like globally and nationally that are needed. I mean, I know I'm passionate about language in general, but just hearing you say that in that way is even so effective and impactful, right? Like right away, that makes so much sense for two reasons. As a supporter, like your fertility and reproductive health, it's such a more positive connotation. It takes away that negative connotation to infertility. And then two, as someone experiencing that, it takes away that negative, like shamed kind of curtain that's closed on it. If you're able to say my reproductive health and my fertility journey, like it's a different, just that small change in language use, I think will completely change the narrative around it.
Right. Like I have asthma, I have a disease of my respiratory system.
Right.
I have endometriosis or whatever it is. I have a disease in my reproductive health tract.
Right.
Like just when you think about it in that way, it just helps so many people. Like, oh, yeah, but there is a disease, and we live in a country where we treat disease in our medical system for free.
Right. Yeah.
Yes, that is one of the, so you brought that up in one of our initial chats, Carolyn, and it's one of the first things I wrote down because you said it was just, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's been recently classified as a disease.
So the World Health Organization for a long time has classified infertility as a medical disease. And under that umbrella, they do, so it's not just a heterosexual couple or person, it is members of the LGBTQ community. They are, as a result of being unable to conceive without this intervention, also under that umbrella.
Right.
We don't have that classification in Canada. Like, it's not a thing here yet. And it's very important that we change that dialogue so we recognize it's recognized.
Yes.
Because you were saying that the impact of, though, being diagnosed with fertility issues is just as heavy, as impactful as a more serious disease like cancer.
And the importance of it. And when you first mentioned that in some of our initial chats, I wanted to follow up to ask if that was an accurate term to use as a disease, or was that harmful? But now I see that language is so important because it's helpful in leading policy. Like, policy has to respond to that.
Right. Absolutely.
Wow.
You know, and this is something, the reality is you're infertile because you have a disease of something. So when you think about it, infertility is the result of having a disease. For example, you have Crohn's colitis, you've had major abdominal surgeries, which have caused scarring near and around your uterus. You can't carry a baby because you have this disease.
Right.
So as a result, so they've classified infertility as a disease. Infertility is the result of the inability to conceive because typically of something else that's happening.
Wow. It's amazing.
The opportunity to keep talking about this so that we just normalize it. And you're like, oh my gosh. And so your listeners, and Jessica and Sarah, you as well, now you're going to talk about this differently. If you will, if you're talking to younger friends or even friends, I don't mean that you're not young, but like, sort of.
No offense taken. Yeah, that's fine.
What I mean by that is, so say you have people in your life who are in university, sort of, just encouraging women to take charge of their reproductive health, knowledgeable, because the more you know, the majority of people are not going to have an issue. Mm-hmm. However, some people will, and it's better to, have the conversation so that at the time of a diagnosis, you can say, oh my gosh, okay, I know there's a network. I know other people that have done this. I know so many babies who are born through IVF. I am going to reach out to them to talk about their experience, just so I feel like I'm not alone on this.
Yeah. Knowledge is power.
Yeah. Someone who so Carolyn would be like someone who I connect quite a few people with. If someone reaches out to me, especially same-sex couples, because you've gotten in, a little bit of the surrogacy network and what's happening around that in Canada. So I always direct kind of Carolyn. But there's another person, her name is Anna Dentino, and she's a naturopath. And she is someone who is just an incredible human. She's originally from Cape Breton as well, has a place here. Her parents still live here. And she lives in Halifax, but she spends 1 week a month in Cape Breton and has a clinic here. And she specializes in fertility. And so herself has gone through challenges starting a family, and she's open about that. But then also she has gone to courses in Hawaii and all over the world on fertility treatments as a naturopath. And so I went to her throughout my entire process. Okay. And so I went to her for everything from like we did, oh my gosh, we did fertility acupuncture before every single treatment. I would go to her clinic, and sometimes it was in Halifax, sometimes it was in Sydney, and she knows all the touch points to do, and that acupuncture can help. And we did, I did a bunch of cleanses with her where it's all natural, medications, like supplements and different things that would help cleanse your body right before you're getting ready to take the medications. We did Mark has seen her, like lots of different things. And so she's really knowledgeable in the Atlantic Canada space, is constantly sharing information. And that's somebody like Anna Dentino is her name. For sure, look her up because she's very active on
We're glad
Instagram,
you brought
and
that up because she's actually coming on the pod.
Yeah, we're chatting with her in 2 weeks.
Amazing.
Yeah.
She's awesome.
So
and works with a lot of fertility patients.
Her, she's so active on social media. Like she shares such important messages, I think. So incredible. A friend of mine, I mentioned Anna to her, and she had an appointment with her recently. And she said, it's amazing how good she felt leaving that hour appointment with Anna after months of stress on her own, or even just with doctors in other ways. But she just said, like, she just normalized so much and made it all so normal and, not as scary as it was seeming, and very. No.
And she meets with, like, if you want, you and your spouse. So like, I felt like that was a great opportunity for Mark to like get into the conversation and feel like it's normal as well. And she's just funny and hilarious and like makes you feel really welcome and good. And, we would do everything from virtual telehealth to her coming to Cape Breton, which is amazing, but then also going to Halifax. And for me, that was just like awesome that she comes down here.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Somebody else too is like, if you're, for me going through it, I needed like something that was like an outlet to just decompress. And so I really got into yoga and found my yoga instructor at the time was like Laura Bowridge at Yellow Space in North Sydney. And she was just like incredible. And so I think finding something that is like your outlet that doesn't have anything to do with anything else. And I didn't know her, but I shared with her what was going on. And so I had no idea who she was. And she had just recently moved to Cape Breton at the time. And I went up to her and said, listen, here's my name. Here's who I am. Nobody knows this. This is what we're going through. I'm coming to your class. If I cry, this is where I cry. If I lie down, so I cry. Like, can you just hold space for like this situation? Like we became like so close through that. And then she ended up like being that person that I would go to like quite a bit for classes. And so I think if you can find something and tell them and know that it's like maybe not a friend, not a family member, and just like not someone who's connected to you, but just knows you're going through it. She was like a check-in point for me. And like she was incredible. Like it was, so I think like finding outlets that help your brain breathe a little was really important.
It's such an important message. And Danielle, I think hearing your journey and your experience in this way and these pieces of advice it's so important and more impactful than I think you even realize, because I think what's really encouraging is your ability to self-advocate just as a human being, right? Like, okay, I need an outlet and I need this, and being able to go to someone and say, here's my story. For the yoga example you just gave, like, here's my story. If I cry, that's why. I just hold the space. Like being able to have those conversations to then set yourself up for like those pieces of joy and those outlets and that support system that you need is so important. I think people will feel really encouraged to do that for themselves, right?
I think it's really important.
It's because it's so much. I think you can get so caught up or overwhelmed with the medical side of it, like the physical pieces and outcomes and
100%.
treatments, like that mental and spiritual and emotional piece is just so much, right? And you both touched on the relationship piece too. Like I think, I'm sure you would have advice for people like to make sure you and your partner are having the outlets you need and making sure you're communicating effectively through it to hold space for each other in that way.
Absolutely.
Incredible.
What a
and one other thing, with the medications, like you just mentioned about getting caught up in it, that was always something that was really hard for me to try and navigate. Like all the pill bottles and the days you have to take it and the times and 3 times a day. So I found a pharmacist that I really liked and we became buddies, and I told her what was happening, and I would go and sit with her. It's Allison Harvey, actually, who you may know, and she owns the Pharmasaves, and she was incredible. And so I would go down to Whitney Pier Pharmasave and sit with her in her office, and she created blister packs, which is what medication managers that you would see for someone who was on anything. And those blister packs, we would do them before every cycle after I got my medication from Al in Halifax. And so that was just one other piece that just got the mental load off me. Like I had a pack and I knew like what I needed to do and it was all ready to go. And so I think if you can get rid of some of the distraction, you are going to start a fertility treatment, then it's really good in the long run, just to help like
take away some of that overwhelm, right? Like that organization just allows you
and
to
just finding people who get it. Yeah. Like Allison was another piece. Like we would joke so much about it, and she was someone I could like message if I was not feeling good or if it wasn't something with the meds. Like she just knew that was what was going on.
It's nice to hear that these resources and professionals and people are out there, right? And and you mentioned how important knowing how to access these resources are. And Carolyn, I assume a big piece of what you do and what Fertility Matters Canada does. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Like, can people just simply Google, and we'll put the website and everything in the show notes, but you know, if someone's out there listening and they're finding themselves on whatever point of this journey, is step one going to Fertility Matters Canada and navigating your website to find some of those resources? What's your advice?
Absolutely. So we truly we're the only organization like this in Canada. And we truly try to be Canada's fertility voice, the voice of the patient. We are advocating for the best resources, the best care, the best access, all of those things. So yeah, you can connect with us directly through, we do the majority of our work through social media and of course the website. And we work with so many professionals across the country, whether you need a fertility lawyer because you're going to be using third-party reproduction, you're a surrogate or an egg, embryo, or sperm donor, we'll connect you with those resources so that you feel like you can make the connection. You say, most often they'll give you a free consultation because we referred you over. The resources exist and they are amazing. And if you can access them, that education piece to help you feel more informed makes the conversations you're having with your medical team that much more effective, impactful. It's not as overwhelming. We run a series called Figuring Out Fertility. So I interview fertility experts across the country on all kinds of different topics. So whether it's basic IVF or I speak with reproductive counselors on how to navigate sort of the mental health piece. So we've got a bank on YouTube and on our social media of all of these resources so you can connect and find out and listen. And sometimes we've had people watching your specific questions, and we've had people connect with a physician, for example, who they didn't really connect with their physician. And then this physician was like, oh, they connected with them, made an appointment with them, they do telehealth. And all of a sudden they're going to Toronto because they've had a more complicated case and they're going to see this doctor because they made a really strong connection and feel that could be.
So just such another important touch point. Like you just steal your phrase that you both said throughout this conversation, like having, you can go here and find so many different resources that pertain to your particular journey, even if it's different than what you've known. Or incredible.
This has been such a powerful conversation and a very, very important one. And we are so thankful for your time the last 2.5 hours. Like, we are so thankful. And I know that Sarah and I could talk all night long, but we are mindful of your time and we know that you have to get up and go to work tomorrow. But I also I know it was important, Danielle, to touch on some certain points in this conversation. So before we go, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you wanted to point out or make note of?
Well,
any last words?
I'm really excited. Canadian Infertility Awareness Week is a national awareness event that we host out of our office. It's happening April 24th to the 30th. And so we'll be celebrating fertility in Canada, and we'll have tons of education. And we've just been working, we've got some secrets up our sleeve, but for those of you in Nova Scotia, Big Fiddle is going to be lighting green on Wednesday, April 27th. In celebration of fertility, and we've got some other stuff. Yeah. And we've got a downtown Halifax location. So stay tuned, but please, we've got a website called, it's www.ciaw.ca. We'll have that updated soon.
Ooh, exciting.
Very exciting.
I'm like on the edge of my seat.
I know.
I know.
Yeah, no, I think, thank you so much for having this conversation and for, shedding light on it. And I don't think there's enough platforms talking about it. And there's just so many people who are living with this in silence. So hopefully this, resonates with people and they know they can reach out to us one-on-one and, feel free to message us if somebody hears this and wants to know more about anything. And I just would like to encourage people to, find their way to connect with someone so they just don't feel alone. And it doesn't need to be public. It just needs to be with somebody, and that you will feel better. 100%. You will feel better if you're not living with this alone.
It's amazing. Thank you both so much. We so appreciate your time and your knowledge and your vulnerability to share your experiences. I thank you for sharing. I think when I found out I was having twins, you both reached out, or I reached out to you to be like, SOS, what next?
That's a whole other podcast.
Yeah, exactly. That really is a whole other one.
Yeah.
But I do appreciate, I think you're both at the forefront of connection and community and support, and the work you're doing. You know how important and impactful it is. But we just want to reiterate that you are doing such important work in your own ways, and communities the positive impact is just everlasting. So I thank you both for joining us around the table tonight and sharing your stories and sharing your knowledge and your information, and just the encouragement and the inspiration of being so vulnerable and encouraging others to do that with your whole hearts. It's very admirable, and we appreciate it so much. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, hopefully we see the province pull through, and that our generation of children won't have to go through as much as we went through. And that's honestly, that's where my head's at now. That's where the goal is. I've switched gears, and we got to get the province on board so other women can, or not women, just everyone can have the opportunity.
That's incredible. And you know what? There's no doubt in my mind that you will accomplish that. But for those of us who can help, what can we all do? I mean, I don't think it just needs to be people who are going through their own fertility journey to make noise about this, right? Like, who do we write our letters to, and what do we say, and how do we help this initiative and these policies move forward? We just watch what you both do.
Yeah, I mean, you can follow Fertility Matters, or East Coast Miracles is the patient advocacy group in Atlantic Canada. They have a Facebook page, so connect there. There will be a letter template coming out, I believe. Fertility Matters has advocated, and we are writing letters on behalf of the Nova Scotia patient, and all of those who are in their lives who are also impacted, grandparents who are not grandparents yet because their children are unable to have children. This is generational. And so I think that that's really important. But, please reach out to your elected officials. Your PC elected official has their party has said that this is important, and it was in their, forgive me, I forget the name of the document, but
it was in their campaign. They ran campaign promises.
So
that's why I voted for them. It's like just putting that out there too.
Yeah.
So we hold them accountable for it.
We have to hold them accountable. And I know they're doing their budgets right now. So reaching out, or, through social media, even to the officials, tagging, I think that's an important conversation, just to make sure that it's not forgotten.
Absolutely.
Amazing. We'll do it. We ask every guest who's around the table some what would you rather questions, and we can't let either of you leave without doing the same thing. So Jessica, if you want to start with our every episode questions.
Yes. So what would you rather? Would you rather coffee or tea? Danielle?
Coffee. Oh, sorry.
Oh, okay. No, it didn't matter. I just didn't know if someone was waiting for me to go. Coffee?
Coffee
Yes.
for both?
Except if I'm at Tim Hortons, then I take tea.
Were you always coffee drinkers, or did parenthood do that to you?
Yes. I grew up on a teapot 4 times a day.
Right.
Yeah. And my kids,
Yeah,
my 3-year-old drinks decaf and my 8-year-old drinks decaf.
That's amazing.
Tea, not coffee.
Right. Yeah.
But they're obsessed. That's like,
Logan's
That's
3.5,
the Cape
and he
Bretoners in
always
them.
asks, he's like, is your tea cooled down enough so I can have a sip?
Yeah.
So funny.
oh,
That is so funny. Carolyn, you're living that life with the 3 boys. So like your oldest is 8. And I'm like, all right, look at you still living and looking great.
Yeah.
So we
Still
can do
alive?
it. We could do
still
it.
alive. You can do it. Yours are closer in age, which I think is definitely more challenging.
Yeah, there's some
exhausting.
challenges to it. But yeah, it's funny. It's nice to know that you're surviving the
You will survive. Get to 3. I keep saying to Danielle, just give it 6 more months.
Yeah.
2.5 is way better than 2. 3
Yeah.
is way better than 2.5.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
Danielle,
yeah.
your girls, Audrey and Sophie, they're 2 now. They're 2
2.5.
2.5.
Almost, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Little twin
So
tornadoes.
I've always asked Carolyn, I'm like, okay, there's light. Like when are we getting to the stage? When are we doing this?
Yeah, that's so important.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, for your wine, do you like red or white?
Red.
White.
Oh. Hear that, Jess? One's white,
I'm a-
one's red. We can share.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's us as well.
Yeah.
And would you rather lounge by the beach or the pool?
Every day, all day, even in the winter.
Beach?
Beach. Yeah. Same.
Yeah.
That's both.
I
of
think
you.
it's
Would you-
engraved in us as Cape Bretoners, right?
Right. You know what's funny though? In Cape Breton, yes, but like if I went down south, I'm more apt to like stay by the pool. Is
Me
that 'cause
too.
there's a bar in it? Maybe.
Yeah.
I can swim out
Probably.
there, but
walk.
anywhere else, it's like beach. Help, yeah, you know.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
yeah, south of
So
town. In your life as parents thus far, would you take like the night shift or the morning shift? What would you rather? Are you like a night owl or an early bird?
That's a good one.
I'm a night. I'd rather the night
Me
shift.
too.
Is
So
neither an option?
Yeah, honestly, I find I appreciate my early. So I am a night owl, was a night owl, but then a year ago shifted to getting up in the 5 o'clock hour.
Oh,
And, yeah. And it's really been transformative in my life. I think it's awesome, except when the time change happened this past fall,
no.
one of my twins gets up at 20 after 5
Oh,
every morning. And
Oh,
so I'm
that's so rude.
cranky now.
right.
Yeah.
Like everybody wants to be asleep, including me, and I'm not because I'm doing
I
my
know.
stuff by myself.
Yes.
So I think I would prefer the morning because I like.
Well,
my
the good
nights
news,
also by
Carolyn,
myself.
though, is that the other time change is coming up in a couple of weeks. So you'll get
Yes.
it back. You'll get
So
it
I'm
back.
gonna get it back.
Yeah.
That is just classic toddler, though. Like you get up, you make the conscious, intentional decision to get up at 5, so you have an
They
hour
can
to
sniff it
yourself,
out.
and they're like, you know what, 5:20, here I am.
My son
There
is
I
the
am.
same way. He can
Yeah.
sense it. He knows. Yeah.
That is
It's
so
so-
funny.
What a good chat. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to our podcast and give us a review. You can find us on social media at The Morning Meeting Podcast and connect with us through email at themorningmeetingpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for sitting around our table. Sarah and Jess.